Hello, and welcome to another episode of Snail Mail with Smokey. I hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you're at, and I hope that your 2024 is off to a wonderful start. A couple weeks ago, I had a viewer leave me a comment and ask if I would be interested in doing a video about how to begin a stamp collection. I thought that was a really great idea as it's a topic that I really haven't covered yet. And so I thought I would take this opportunity to talk to you about how to begin a stamp collection, and more specifically, about how I began my stamp collection. I've only been collecting for about 7 or 8 years now, and I still consider myself a beginner. But I thought I would share with you some things that I did that worked for me and some things that I wish I would have done that would have helped me along in the hobby. So, the first thing that I thought was important to cover is what I'm calling stamp speak. When I decided to begin collecting postage stamps, I bought a book, I watched videos, I read everything that I could about the hobby of stamp collecting. And to be honest, I was a bit intimidated at first because there were lots of words and phrases that I'd never heard before, and I sure didn't understand what they meant. So, in today's video, we're going to take 10 of those words and phrases and we're going to talk about them. This will be the first in a series of Stamp Speak videos that will go along in this series of how to begin a stamp collection. So, whether you're just beginning your journey of collecting stamps or whether you've been collecting for quite a while now, I really think that there'll be some useful and helpful information in these videos. So, stamp speak, like I said, it's just learning words and phrases associated with postage stamp collecting. And this is the first word, philately. Now, let me be really honest with you. When I first began studying stamp collecting and trying to learn the hobby, this is the word that popped up. And if I'm being really honest, I didn't even know how to pronounce it. I was like, what's this philately word? Well, philately is simply the collection and study of postage stamps. Now, we all collect stamps for many different reasons. Sometimes we collect them because we like the image on the stamp. Sometimes it's because we're really interested in the country that's issued the stamp. Maybe it's the denomination of the stamp or the date the stamp was issued or the postmark that's on the stamp. Whatever the reason, there are so many different reasons why we collect postage stamps. And whatever they are, it boils down to the fact that each stamp has a story to tell us. That's what philately is. Philately is collecting stamps and studying the story that they have to tell us. So, whether this is your first day collecting stamps or you've been doing it for 30 years, you're a philatelist. So, welcome to the world of philately and what is, in my opinion, the best hobby on the planet. Next is postage stamp. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're going, hey, Smokey, we know what stamps are. After all, we're collecting them. I know that you know what a stamp is, but let me once again be honest with you and tell you that I didn't fully understand what a stamp was until I really started getting into philately. Now, at its root, a postage stamp is a small adhesive piece of paper that has a specific value on it. It's issued by a postal authority. It's affixed to a letter or parcel, and it indicates the amount of postage has been paid. But let me tell you what it really is. It's a contract. It's a receipt. It's a coupon for goods and services. Let me explain. You take a letter and you walk into your local post office and you tell the postal clerk, I would like to send this letter to such and such person at such and such address. They'll say fine, and they'll tell you how much postage it takes to get the letter there. So you pay the fee, and in return, you are handed this coupon or this receipt that indicates you have paid the amount of money that is needed for this service to transpire. That's what a postage stamp is. The postage stamp is your guarantee, the post office guarantee, and the recipient's guarantee that the service of delivering your letter or card or package has been paid for. And I think that's a really, really great thing. That's what a postage stamp is. Now, gum. This is also one of the first words that I read and come across. And I thought to myself, I don't need to know this. I don't even chew gum. But that's really not what it's talking about. In this case, gum is the coating of adhesive glue on the back of an unused stamp. Now, in the photograph that you see on the screen, you see two stamps. You see that shiny substance on the back? That's gum. Gum is the substance that is moistened, that activates it and allows you to stick it to a letter or card or package. Now, you're going to come across this a lot in collecting, especially in listings and in catalog listings of stamps. It's going to talk about the gum that's on back. Some stamps, it's going to say full gum. Some stamps is going to say no gum. It may even say that they've been re-gummed. Um, so there's a lot of options when it comes to the gum of a stamp. Now, I realize that we live in the day of self adhesive postage stamps, and to be honest, that's the next thing we're going to talk about. But also be aware that if you collect stamps from any other time period than the common period, you're going to deal with stamps that have gum on the back. These affect the value and also affect the integrity of the stamp. As promised, self adhesive postage stamps. Now, a self adhesive stamp is a postage stamp that has a pressure sensitive adhesive that doesn't require moistening in order to adhere to paper. And they're usually issued on a removable backing paper. Here is a great example of self adhesive postage stamps. These wonderful cat and dog stamps that were issued by the United States Postal Service last year are self adhesive postage stamps. And like a lot of other countries, the US has gone completely to self adhesive postage stamps. Now, there are some really, really good things about self adhesive postage stamps. Thing number one, and to me, the best thing about a self adhesive postage stamp, is you don't have to moisten the back of the stamp, which for me as a kid meant licking the stamp. You don't have to do that. You don't have to take a sponge and moisten the back or run your finger through some water and then put it on the back of the stamp. However, you did it, you don't have to do that anymore. It was really easy to over moisten a stamp, and then you put the stamp on the letter, and the letter gets wet, and you get a fingerprint on the stamp. Plus, it moves around, and gum stamps don't stick as well. Let's face it. How many times have you had a stamp on a letter and it just popped right off? This doesn't do it. These things stick to anything that you put them on. They are not coming off. That's the great thing about self adhesive postage stamps. And if they do come off, they're certainly not coming off in one piece. They do exactly what they were designed to do. They adhere to the card or letter or package, and they do a great job of that. That's also the bad thing about self adhesive postage stamps. Because if you are a stamp collector, you're going to want to get that stamp off of that card or off of that envelope. And it is almost impossible to do so with self adhesive postage stamps. And I know that we have all come across this problem because, unlike gum stamps, they can't merely be soaked off in water. Now, there are several products available on the market today, both philatelic and household products, that do a pretty fair job of removing self adhesive postage stamps. In fact, there were some really great videos available right here on YouTube that show you how to do that. Graham Beck of Exploring Stamps has a really nice video where he experiments with several different items and talks about how each one of them work in removing self adhesive postage stamps. Also, that dad guy here on YouTube has a really nice video about some products that will help you remove self-adhesive postage stamps. So if you're interested in that, please go check out those videos. Like I said, there's some really good videos out there. That's why I haven't produced one yet, because there are some other videos that do a really great job of explaining how to remove these self-adhesive postage stamps. Next is commemorative stamps. So you may have heard this term before, or maybe you haven't. Uh, But what is a commemorative stamp? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like it is. It's a stamp that's issued for a limited period of time, usually at the first class rate. It's usually larger than a definitive stamp, and a commemorative stamp honors a person or persons or organization or event or a cause or a significant anniversary. So, like I said, it does exactly what it says it does. It commemorates something or someone. Here are some issues of some commemorative stamps issued by the United States Postal Service. You'll see the stamp on the far right, which commemorates the life of John Lewis. The stamp in the middle is from a series called the Pony Car Series. This, which I think is a really groovy car, the 1969 Ford Mustang. You see stamps showing images from the Webb Space Telescope. And then I've also thrown in one of my favorite stamps, and that's this 1957 stamp issued for the 50th anniversary of the Oklahoma statehood, which is my home state. Each of these stamps are commemorative stamps. They're larger in format than a definitive stamp. They all commemorate a person or a place or a thing or an anniversary. But also the thing that makes them different from definitives is that they're only issued for a limited period of time. These stamps are printed in large runs. They're issued to the post offices around the country that issued them. And then usually once they're gone, they're gone. Like I can't walk into my local post office and say, hey, I'd like a sheet of those 1957 50th anniversary of Oklahoma stamps. They'd say, you're crazy. Uh, we don't have those. That was almost 70 something years ago, because they don't continue reprinting them year after year. Uh, I can't even walk into my local post office and get this pony car series of stamps because they've sold out of however many that they were given by the United States Postal Service. So a commemorative stamp is only available as long as they're available. That's saying if your post office gets 1,000 sheet of these stamps, once they sell those 1,000 sheets, they're probably not going to get any more. Now, maybe they will, but they're certainly not going to have them a year later or 2 or 3 years later. And that brings us to definitive stamps. Now, a definitive stamp is used on most mail, and I say that because 7 out of 10 times when you get a letter, and usually if it's business correspondence, it's going to come with a definitive stamp. Not because they're cheaper, just because you can buy them in larger quantities, and most businesses prefer to do just that. They're usually a smaller size stamp, too. They're printed in really large quantities, and a lot of times in a single color ink, although that is changing, especially here in the U.S. They're available from the post office for an indefinite period of time, which, unlike a commemorative stamp, may be years. For example, here in the U.S., if you walk into your local post office and you ask the clerk for a book of stamps, they're going to ask you what kind of stamps would you like. If your reply is I don't care or you make a choice, 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to walk out of the post office with a booklet of stamps that looks a lot like this. And I say that because this is the U.S. flag series of stamps. These are the preeminent, in my opinion, definitive stamp here in the U.S. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I could walk into my post office and buy a book or sheet or coil of U.S. flag stamps. Today, I can walk into my post office and buy a book or sheet or coil of U.S. flag stamps, and 10 years down the road, I will be able to walk into the post office and buy, that's right, a book or sheet or coil of U.S. flag stamps. Now, the design does change from time to time. Every few years, the United States Postal Service gets a whim and they update the image of the flag stamp. But nevertheless, it's always an image of the United States flag and an image that I personally think is really great. However, I hardly ever buy flag stamps because I really like commemorative stamps. That's not to say I don't like definitive stamps. As a matter of fact, I have several of these definitive flag stamps from years gone by in my collection and definitive stamps from all over the world. And I think they make a great addition to anyone's collection. But they are certainly something that is um, relatively available for most postal services is whatever your country's definitive stamp is. So that brings us to the topic of hinges or hinged stamps. In that first stamp book that I bought and videos that I was watching in stamp catalogs, I kept seeing the phrase hinged or not hinged or partially hinged or hinged remnant. And apart from door hinges, I wasn't really familiar with the term. So a hinge, when it comes to stamps, is a small piece of gum paper that's used to affix a stamp, usually to an album page. Case in point, this is a stamp hinge. It is a small piece of gum paper. It's moistened on one side, applied to the back of a postage stamp. The other side is then moistened and applied to a stamp album page. Now, for decades, this was the way that stamp collectors collected stamps. They bought stamps, they bought hinges, which are relatively inexpensive. You get a pack of, I don't know, 100 or 500 or 1,000 for a penny a piece or less, well, less than a penny a piece. I don't even know. A quarter of a cent a piece, maybe. They're just so inexpensive. And this is the way people collected stamps. They put hinges on the back of the stamps and they affixed them to their album. And they did this because they thought this helped to preserve the integrity of the stamp and decreased the risk of damage to the stamp. Now, like everything else in our world, philately changes and the hobby changes. And what was in 20 years ago isn't in today. So that's why I am not a proponent of stamp hinges. And I'll tell you why. I believe that stamp hinges really risk damaging the stamp. Uh, if you ever go to remove the hinge, there's always going to be evidence that a hinge is there. Whether it is discoloration to the back of the stamp because the hinge has been there for 20 years or 30 years, whether it's an actual hinge remnant or piece of the hinge that's left behind from the stamp, there's a chance that your stamp could tear or rip or thin in the area where the stamp is. And so, because of that risk, I don't like to use them. I know thousands and thousands of stamp collectors have used them for many years. I know that people still use them today. It's the great thing about stamp collecting. It's your hobby. You can collect however you want. For me, stamp mounts are a much better option for collecting. Stock books, I think, are a better option. I just tend to shy away from stamp hinges, and I want you to be aware that if you do use hinges, that there are those risks associated with them, in my opinion. Moving on to perforations. Perforations are the holes that are punched between stamps on a sheet to make them easy to separate. So when stamps were first produced, especially the penny black, the penny red, they were produced in sheets of 100. Postal clerks would have to take scissors or shears and cut out each stamp. Then they come up with the idea of, hey, let's make perforations, then they're easier to tear. Perforations are numbered. As a matter of fact, you can buy a tool called a perforation guide. It's usually made out of plastic. I have seen a few that are made out of light aluminum or metal. They're available online for just a couple of dollars, uh, and they allow you to measure the perforation of each stamp. And you may say, do I need to do that? No, you don't have to. It's your stamp collection. Collect what you like. I own a perforation gauge, and I can count on one hand how many times I've actually used it to count perforations on a stamp. But it is a valuable tool to have if you need it. Case in point, you could have two stamps that look identical but have different perforations. The difference in those perforations may be one stamp is a perf 12, one stamp is a perf 14, and you may have a pretty significant difference in value for each stamp depending on the perforation. So in that case, it's really good to know them and to know how to count the perforation. In today's world of self-adhesive stamps, we have what I like to call faked perforations because there's no need to tear them from the sheet anymore. Postal services simply include them on the stamp to make them look, for lack of a better word, more stampy. Moving on to used stamps. You're going to have lots of decisions to make beginning your stamp collection. And like I said, I was overwhelmed by many of them when I first started. And one of the decisions you're going to make is, what do you collect? Do you collect new stamps or used stamps? Or what do you collect? Do you collect all of them, both of them? So what's a used stamp? Well, a used stamp is a stamp that has been used postally and appropriately postmarked. Now, I say that word appropriately postmarked in quotations because we've all received a postcard or a letter with a stamp on it that looks like it just come from the post office and somehow has missed all the machines and hands that it has passed through and has reached us without any form of postmark or cancellation. But the majority of the time, you receive a stamp and it looks just like this. It has been postmarked or canceled. It's done that way for a couple reasons. The first reason is because that shows that the business transaction that you have entered into with your postal service is complete. You paid a fee to send an item. That item was sent and delivered as promised, and thus your transaction is now complete. It also provides a way to stop anybody with any nefarious ideas of soaking that stamp off of the envelope and using it again, thus skirting around the task of going to the post office and paying money for their own postage stamps. That's why these stamps are obliterated or canceled so they cannot be used again. So, there again, a used stamp is any stamp that has made its way through the postal system. And that brings us to the last word or phrase, and that is mint never hinged. I kept seeing the letters MNH in every stamp book or blog or vlog or magazine or internet listing. Mint MNH. That just stands for mint never hinged. It means that it is a stamp in the same condition as originally was issued by the Postal Service. This means that if it is a gum stamp, it has its full gum and it has never had a hinge applied. If it is a self-adhesive stamp, then it is still on the backing that it came with from the post office. It's usually, cut into a single format with the backing still on it. And it's just like you went to the post office and laid down your money and they handed you a stamp. That is a mint never hinged stamp. Now, you can have mint hinge stamps, which is a stamp that's either gummed or self-adhesive that is post office fresh. It looks just like it looked the day it left the post office. It's never been used in the post office, but it has had a hinge applied. That would be a mint hinge stamp. Well, that's it for this video. I hope that these terms and definitions have been helpful for you. I know they were really helpful for me when I first started collecting. And so I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please consider subscribing to the channel. We are so very close of reaching that milestone of 500 subscribers. And I'm really grateful to every one of you who have tuned in and subscribed. Also, give me a thumbs up and leave me a comment. I hope you've enjoyed this format. I'll be back with more videos where you see my face and I show you stamps and postcards. Uh, but I thought for this series of videos, this was a more appropriate format. So thank you again for watching. And until next time, have a great day. Bye bye.